All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Jake Sherry. I'm an applications engineer with Morningstar. Today, we're bringing you a special topic webinar talking about system monitoring with Morningstar products and SNMP, which is a new protocol we've implemented on many of our legacy products through the use of an accessory device, which I'll talk about. For those of you joining us, you can, if you have any questions during the webinar, I would advise you just to type them into the chat box in the GoToWebinar pane, and then I'll do my best to take as many of them at the end of the webinar during our Q&A session. Also, there is a PDF of the slides in the handouts section of the GoToWebinar pane, so you can access that as well. And the webinar will be recorded, and we'll be sending out a link to that recording via email within the next 24 hours. So you should be expecting that. All right, so I guess with that said, let me get started. Talk a little bit about our agenda for today. So for those of you new to this, we'll talk about what is SNMP, what does it stand for, where is it used, that sort of thing. It has many features and benefits. We'll talk about those. Also, the markets and use cases, and we'll compare it to some other monitoring protocols you might be familiar with, those included in the Morningstar family. And then what are the components needed for implementation? Give you access to all the resources and supporting documents that we have to enable you to use this new protocol. And then we'll talk about the network management systems, which is the software piece that utilizes this protocol to help you manage your sites. Both IT equipment and solar equipment power systems can be managed in one platform. So we'll talk about that. And again, saving time for Q&A at the end. So just to start out here, let me talk about the basics of SNMP. First of all, what does it stand for? It stands for Simple Network Management Protocol. It's an internet standard that is used to manage devices on an IP network. Typically, you'll find it in IT environments where you have a lot of equipment, servers, modems, routers, printers, etc., that all speak this unified language. It is a common machine language, and again, you can use it to pull the status and even modify operation of some system components, mainly used on a local area network, private networks, or across a wide area network, if you have the proper security in place. So with that said, let me just talk about some of the advantages of SNMP. One of the key things is it is an open protocol. So there is no licensing or proprietary communication that you need to adopt or go through approval process in order to implement or pay for. It's all free licensing. Anybody can use it. And so we have implemented SNMP version 2C. There's several variants of SNMP dating back to the 1980s. SNMP version 1 was the original, and they've added some additional features and improvements as it has evolved. And so they're actually on SNMP version 3 now, but we have implemented SNMP version 2C, which is the most widely used. And it is widely supported by third-party, what are called network management systems. Those are the software providers, the software platforms that help you to manage your IT infrastructures. One additional benefit is it's very low latency, which means it doesn't consume a whole lot of bandwidth. It's pretty lean in terms of just giving you the information you need, not hogging up too much additional bandwidth. Also, you'll find within the network management systems, they offer a lot of additional capabilities for system monitoring, including you can set up status notifications and even adjust the polling intervals depending on your data requirements and how much data resolution you require. Also, the data is quite simple to interpret. There's not a whole lot of conversion or decoding that needs to take place. It's more or less transmitted in plain English or numerical format. All you may have to do is apply some data scaling, just with a constant to multiply all of the returned values in order to get them to the proper unit scaling, and we'll talk about that coming up as well. So as I mentioned, typical users of SNMP, you'll see mostly IT system operators, network management professionals as well. The telecommunications and internet service industries, there's a lot of wireless internet service providers in rural areas and all over the world that utilize SNMP for the convenience of monitoring their traditional networking equipment. And so we'll talk about that. Also, it is expanding in use to other industries and commercial users, that have a scalable monitoring, a need for a scalable monitoring platform. They have many sites that they're trying to manage seamlessly without jumping between platforms. They have a lot of existing IT infrastructure in place using, commercially available equipment, radios, Ethernet switches, backhauls, etc., that are all, network capable to begin with. So being able to manage all of those assets, through a single universal platform makes it a lot easier to collect the data they need. One particular use you'll see, I think, gaining in popularity, oil and gas, which is a big industry for off-grid solar applications where, many of our products are used. They see some benefit in adopting SNMP as well because all of their much of their sensors and remote telemetry systems, remote terminal units are IP enabled, and being able to tie that all together and monitor their power system as well is a critical component of managing their entire system operation. So here I'll just show you where SNMP fits into the system, and basically, what we're providing through the use of our products, which are now SNMP enabled. You can see here just an example of our ProStar MPPT. It's a mid-range MPPT solar charge controller. It can manage the loads as well for whatever your application is, DC loads. And again, having a lot of the equipment used in these applications, whether it's telecom, oil and gas, lighting, surveillance and security with, camera systems, even residential to some extent, there's a lot of IP-enabled equipment. And now having that capability with your solar components, it makes it a lot easier to manage. And so that's what we've done through the use of our EMC1 Ethernet adapter. You see that here. We have a simple data cable RJ11 connecting the controller to the EMC1, and that provides an Ethernet connection to your switch or your router. And then you can, again, either operate that on your private network, or you can use it over a wide area network with the internet, publicly as well. And you have access to really 3 different protocols at the moment through this EMC1. SNMP is the one we'll be talking about today, which is facilitated and supported by a network management system. We also have the ability to retrieve data via HTTP, and we present that in just a web browser display for real-time data. And then you can also, we call that live view, by the way. And then MODBUS is the other commonly used protocol for off-grid applications, largely in SCADA and industrial automation environments. And we have our MSView PC software as sort of the user interface for those, less familiar with the ins and outs of implementing MODBUS. So that's basically how SNMP fits into the system. And so if we talk about, the general question, when would you want to use SNMP over any other protocol or application for accessing, Morningstar data? Well, really, again, you want to, if you do have a lot of existing IT equipment on site, you already have a means of monitoring those assets. It's very easy to implement the addition of the data from your solar devices as well. They represent the power system, so all of the metrics around the battery performance parameters would be important to retrieve that data as well to manage the whole system, to make sure that uptime is preserved. You're managing the network side as well, not just on the traffic, managing traffic through the routers and switches, et cetera, but keeping those devices up and running with the power system. And also, again, the one additional aspect of SNMP, the biggest thing is if you are looking for a scalable means of monitoring. So if you're not just using it for one-off device, you want to connect to, hundreds or even thousands of devices simultaneously. The scalability of SNMP and the way that you can manage the data, all under one umbrella, and have nice system level views, notifications of, individual device performance, you can get at a granular level, but you can also see the full 30,000 foot view of all the devices you're managing under one user platform. So again, the system level capabilities that SNMP enables are arguably the most valuable asset for those applications. So one question, just to head this one off, we often get the comparison of SNMP to MODBUS. Morningstar has long been familiar with MODBUS as, again, in the off-grid applications, oil and gas, a lot of automation equipment and industrial SCADA applications use MODBUS. It's actually the standard communication protocol for the solar industry, as it is specifically adopted by SunSpec, which is, sort of a regulatory body that tries to create standards and universalize the data profiles of typical equipment that's used in the solar industry. But SNMP is a little different than MODBUS. MODBUS, I think, is in general a bit broader, just in that it can be communicated via different data link layers. You can communicate through serial, you can communicate through IP, and Morningstar does support, both of those means as well. But again, there are differences in terms of when you would want to use one versus the other. We'll talk about that in just a second. So both are really application layer components. For those of you familiar with the OSI model for telecommunications, like a 7-layer diagram that describes, the data structure for digital communication. And the application layer, I think, is the bottom layer, layer number 7. Now, with the protocols, MODBUS, again, you can have different physical adaptations. You can, have a DB9 that uses RS-232. You can have a 4-wire twisted pair multi-drop network that uses RS-485. Both would support MODBUS. However, SNMP is exclusively an IP standard, and again, the most common IP interface these days would be, just a typical RJ45 Cat5 Ethernet cable. And again, both protocols can be communicated using that medium. You can actually use both at the same time. However, they do have, different use cases why you would want to use one over the other. The MODBUS IP, just to mention, it uses the transport layer TCP IP stack for the Ethernet communication, as opposed to SNMP, which is actually a UDP, user datagram protocol. The UDP, as we mentioned, is low latency. It is more of a broadcast as opposed to polling individual devices, and then it can talk to multiple devices simultaneously, whereas MODBUS is what they call master-slave is the common implementation, or leader-follower is maybe more appropriate, in that you have to acknowledge a response from each of the follower devices when it is polled by the leader, whereas SNMP can sort of just collect bulk data from a variety of devices that are all connected to the same local area network, and retrieve all the data sort of simultaneously. And again, as I mentioned, the MODBUS is, very common for SCADA systems. The primary reason for that is really the reliability. Again, mostly industrial applications using MODBUS. There's some additional checks and balances, sort of, in terms of how the packets are transferred. There's what are called like checksums to, get an acknowledgement and response from the slave device when it is commanded by the master. And so there's a little bit, again, it's a little bit heavier on the bandwidth side, but it's very reliable. It's been around forever. And again, as I mentioned, it is supported by SunSpec, which makes it, very common in the solar industry. In, many UPS backup or telecommunication network applications, SNMP may be a better choice, just because it really provides overall compatibility with, in a universal environment with many other types of equipment. So they're all speaking the same language. It's a lot easier than managing multiple protocols, for each manufacturer, or anything that is, strictly proprietary. You only get insight into one component within the system. This helps you extrapolate and see everything overall. So this is a good chart that talks about just kind of transitioning a little bit from the protocol per se, talking more about the application or programs that are supporting these individual protocols through the Morningstar family in particular. So what you can see here is the SNMP protocol requires a network management software, and we'll talk about specific instances of those coming up. But that is not something that Morningstar provides. Nothing that is proprietary to Morningstar. It would be sourced from a third party. We do have various suggestions and recommendations from those we have used or are familiar with, and we can provide more information about that toward the end of the webinar. And how that compares to our existing monitoring platforms, those being Morningstar LiveView, which is, again, supported by the HTTP protocol. It's just a HTML web page that is hosted locally on the device. Just serves up a web page with real-time data display. Pretty simple, but informative for, quick views if you have access to a web browser. Morningstar MS View is a PC-based software. It actually has to run on Windows, but it does have a bit more capability in terms of programming and even the ability to support multiple devices. It's not really intended for scalable monitoring the way SNMP is. Really, you're sort of capped off at, it depends how much data you're viewing or pulling from each device simultaneously as to how many devices MS View can support, but it really is intended for peak performance as a one-to-one operation, just a window into one device at a time. And again, the MS View can be used via serial communication with a PC adapter, just connects via DB9 or USB. We do have adapters for different controllers that you may need to connect to your PC. And then the SNMP network monitoring software, has a lot more capability, as you can see. You can see all kinds of log data visibility. You can manage multiple sites, which is really the key. And you can even generate reports. You can do all kinds of sorting and filtering based on different statuses of different sites. If you want to see all the sites that, again, just if there happens to be an alert, alarm notification going off at one particular site, you can view all of the active sites that have alarm conditions. A lot of just additional software capability in a much broader sense with the NMS. So another question we often get, again, is can SNMP be used simultaneously with other EMC-based services? My answer to that is yes. I'm sorry, just zoom down to this slide, go back. Not sure how that happened. Okay, all right. So you can use multiple protocols simultaneously. Oh, why does that keep happening? Don't know why that happened. Sorry about that, guys. Let's get my. Nope. Okay. I have to not look at it. Sorry. So you can use multiple protocols simultaneously, and therefore multiple platforms of monitoring using those protocols. So if, for instance, you wanted to use MS View, LiveView, and a network management system all at the same time, you can do that. They are all each served up on different ports, separate ports on your IP router. So they all communicate over those ports and are isolated from additional traffic, all and can all be pulled through an internet gateway simultaneously. MODBUS is accessible on port 502, LiveView on port 80, and SNMP on port 161. Okay, so there are really 5 main components that we'll talk about in the SNMP network structure. We have an SNMP manager, that would typically be at the server level, where, again, all of the data is going to be stored locally for the most part. There are cloud-based network management systems that allow for cloud storage through internet connection, but in most cases, the data is stored locally for security reasons on site. And then there's also the SNMP agent. Now, the agent is what we call the client. That is going to be what is pulled by the SNMP manager. The manager has the network management system software running on it, and through various commands and implementations of SNMP, can pull the agent for various types of data, either one at a time or bulk information. We'll talk about the different command types in the next slide. Basically, what enables it is the SNMP manager has what's called the Management Information Base, or the MIB, and that is a hierarchical database of all types of commands and data that can be retrieved, or that the device will respond to, the SNMP agent will respond to, that is summarized in a file format called the MIB file. And those we do make available to you. They're specific for each Morningstar controller, and I'll show you how to access those. Within the management information base, there are what are called object identifiers. So that's really the list of variables or parameters, you could say, that tell you what the address is for associated bits of data that you want to retrieve. So battery voltage will have its own OID. Heat sink temperature will have a different OID. But there is some commonality to the structure of it, excuse me, of the OID. It's basically a string of numbers separated by a bunch of decimal points, and the root should be consistent from all of the variables within a specific device family, and so that makes it easier to identify which device you can pull different data from. And I'll show you a good example of that coming up. And then also trap notifications are another component that is often talked about. That would allow the agent to proactively send out alerts to the system manager, the SNMP manager, the NMS, based on various alarm or fault conditions that it perceives. So it would send out a proactive notification instead of waiting to be pulled by the manager. It's going to send out notification, and it actually expects acknowledgement of receipt from the manager as well. Those trap notifications are not supported by Morningstar through the SNMP implementation on the EMC1 device. We do support sort of a limited number of traps on our TriStar MPPT60, but it's really not full customization that folks often refer to when they're talking about trap notifications. So all of the operation of our SNMP implementation would be through polling, real-time data viewing. So again, the SNMP agent that we've implemented is installed in our EMC1 adapter. The EMC1 is all that it needs to activate it is a simple firmware update. You'll see exactly how to accomplish that in the upcoming slides. The MIB file, I'm sorry, the SNMP and other EMC services we talked about. So SNMP, MODBUS, LiveView, all can be operating simultaneously on different ports. The implementation of our SNMP is version 2C. That's very important to make sure compatibility with your network management system or software package that you're using. You want to make sure that they support SNMP version 2C, because you do run into some compatibility issues working with different. Most of the NMSs do support multiple versions of SNMP, but they're not necessarily backwards compatible, so the network management system has to know which specific version you're using. And the EMC1 does support, again, just the standard polling capabilities with SNMP to report on critical events. So that would not include the trap notifications. The traps really have to be customized for each individual device. They have to kind of be embedded, and they're not as reliable, to be honest, as the polling. So in the interest of simplifying the operation and making it more reliable, polling is what is recommended. And again, one additional feature that we do not support in this case is the SNMP set command. So you can't actually change settings through SNMP. For that, you would have to use our MSView software that we talked about earlier. That's the PC-based application. You can either use locally, or you can set up with port forwarding to access it remotely over an IP network. That software, which again is based on the MODBUS protocol, would allow for customization of user values there, but that is not supported through SNMP, mainly for security reasons. There's all types of additional concerns for the user if, again, you have people that can access your site if they start to change values in the operation of your solar system or your network management. Necessarily don't necessarily want them tampering with that. So we've chosen to implement, again, just the polling, no traps, no set commands. So again, you'll see here, this is just a summary of the commands and message types that are supported by the EMC1 and all of the connected devices. SNMP GET request is the most common. That's typically what's working on the back end of the network management systems. It's just issuing, as you're looking at your monitoring template, it's just issuing GET commands in the background with whatever specified polling frequency you have set up in the NMS. You can do GET next, which allows you to just step through the MIB tree or the OID hierarchy step by step, so you can see sort of in chronological order, what variable comes next in the tree. And you can also do GET bulk. GET bulk was not a feature that was available for SNMP version 1. It was only added for SNMP version 2C. And so that is one of the benefits that you have. Instead of issuing a bunch of iterative GET and GET next commands, you can just do a GET bulk and retrieve all types of data simultaneously, as opposed to one by one. And the response is the reply from the agent just to acknowledge that it has delivered whatever data is requested of it. Again, no sets, no traps, and no inform command. The inform command is related to the trap on the agent side. All right, so going forward here, let's talk a little bit more about Morningstar and how this all is integrated. This is a list of all the specific components that are supported, all of our MPPT controllers, the PWM controllers, TriStar PWM, ProStar PWM, are data enabled and supported by the EMC1. Therefore, they can all be retrofitted with SNMP capability. All that they need to do is do a simple firmware update on the EMC1. You don't have to update the firmware of the controller itself, just the EMC1. I'll tell you how to do that in just a sec. And again, also our inverter line, which is growing, hopefully soon to include our multi-wave in the future. That would be SNMP enabled as well, as it may be a common use for UPS applications and other hybrid solar applications as well. So just to talk about how to add SNMP to a Morningstar product, again, it is enabled through the EMC1, which needs to be connected to the RJ11 MeterBus port of all the supported devices. The MeterBus port, again, it's sort of our MeterBus is our local proprietary language that we, talk natively, and then the EMC1 is sort of a serial to IP communication bridge, which then opens that up from MODBUS to SNMP. And again, you can access all of that information over an IP network then. Talk about, a little difficulty with the screen here. So where do you get the firmware? The firmware version that you'll need to enable SNMP is version 15 build 0, which is the most current up-to-date firmware right now available on our support site. So if you go to the EMC1 product page on our website, just go to the morningstarcorp.com homepage, click on products, go to accessories and EMC1. You'll see the EMC1 product page. There is a link on the right-hand sidebar that says support library docs under the tools and resources. And then you'll just jump to, that'll take you to our support site. You just jump to the software tab, which is the middle tab there, and you will see the EMC1 firmware update listed. You can go ahead and just click on the download icon. And there is a instructional video here as well, and I believe it is posted on the EMC1 product page as well, that instructs you how to do a firmware update of the EMC1. You just use the, it's all done via web interface, so the live view web GUI, you just pull that up with a static IP address, just use the default IP address that comes with the unit. I think it's 192.168.1.253. So you'll connect, directly to your PC or through a router via Ethernet, and then navigate to that website and on your local area network, and you'll be able to see the live view web page. And there's a I think under the system tab, you'll find the firmware update accordingly. But again, all of that is detailed in the video. So the next thing you'll want to do is download the MIB files and the OID tables. So the MIB files you can find in the SNMP FAQ, which is, again, you'll see the main call out for the SNMP launch announcement takes you to a FAQ web page with a bunch of frequently asked questions and step-by-step instructions what you need to get going. The MIB files are contained there in a link from to a downloadable zip file. Within that zip file, you'll find also a Excel spreadsheet of OID tables. So what that does is it just nicely consolidates all the information for each Morningstar controller into a list of what data is available for polling on each device and the associated addresses for each of those data values as well. So it's all just kind of nicely presented for you instead of having to sort through the MIB file. Just one thing to keep in mind, when you are working with a network management system that is, again, implementing SNMP, many of them can allow you to automatically upload your MIB files that are provided by, various manufacturers. And so they'll have some type of MIB importer tool. That's one thing you want to keep in mind. If it is available, in order to resolve the data from a particular Morningstar device, you really need 3 layers of MIB files for proper interpretation. So there's a general Morningstar MIB in that zip folder. There's an EMC1 MIB. So those 2 MIBs will have to be used regardless of what specific device you're monitoring. And then lastly would be the device-specific MIB. So if it's, the SunSaver MPPT, you'll want to use that, the appropriate labeled MIB there in the zip folder for the SunSaver MPPT. Once all 3 of those are uploaded, into the MIB importer, then it can actually resolve all the data it needs to identify each device. It's difficult because you can't put them all in one. Otherwise, if you're monitoring multiple systems, it'll create redundancy if you try to combine all of the MIBs into one. So it's a little bit troublesome to have to separate it out. But as long as you keep it straight, that 3 MIBs you will need for each device. Again, if you're uploading them all simultaneously, that's fine. It should be able to resolve as long as you have those Morningstar generic MIB and the EMC gateway MIB. And then again, don't forget about the OID tables. You'll see that in the zip folder as well. So the MIB file, just to talk about it for those that are adventurous enough to explore it, the MIB file is, again, just a standardized document you can open as a text file in Notepad or Microsoft Word. You may just need to change the file extension from .mib to .doc or whichever medium you want to use, or .txt to open it up in the appropriate application. But it's all written in plain English, pretty much, as I mentioned earlier. There are 3 different, when you scroll through it, obviously there's a lot of information in there to a pretty high level of detail. But what you'll find is there are 3 different data types contained in the MIB. Basic string, just like a text string, you can use to, send any type of plain English text value without any additional conversion needed. An integer, if you're just using, you can send integers as strings as well if it's just a static. Otherwise, if it needs to be interpreted or calculated, the integer values you'll see listed in there, and those may need to be scaled depending on what type of data it is. If it's a voltage measurement or a current measurement or a temperature measurement, they all have different scaling factors for each device. And then there's also the bit field. I'm sorry, I'll back up one step. The integers, there's another type of data called enumerated field. So it's similar to bit field, but what it shows you is for example, like a charge state for your battery, you can be in float, absorption, equalize, etc. But you're only in one state at any given time. And the interpretation on the network management system as it's reading that enumerated field is it resolves an integer, and then the integer corresponds to a specific readout with a text string attached in the MIB file. So you'll see those listed. It basically is transmitted from the controller as an integer, and then it's interpreted using the MIB file as the associated text string, with that integer. The bit field is a little bit different. We use the bit field syntax for alarms and faults, and that's one thing that can be a little bit tricky in my experience, because it does follow the SNMP version 2C standard. It's a very standardized part of that implementation is the bit field. The output from a bit field is what's called a octet string. Basically, it looks like hexadecimal notation. So you may see, in some NMSs, some may just show you, two integer values. Well, it would really be 8 integer values separated in pairs of 2s. And some NMSs can't resolve beyond that because they don't know how to interpret that notation, meaning they don't really comply with the SNMP version 2C standard. And I've had to work with several NMSs. Some do have sort of workarounds where they can accommodate that. It's pretty important information because, the alarms and faults are really the part that is proprietary to Morningstar that you, of course, would want to be notified of, if something that is happening in your system. You want to get those proactive notifications. And so that's the bit fields are the ones that sometimes some NMSs can support them. Others may need a little bit of a workaround or require some additional code development or even like a third-party plugin. A lot of the NMSs have community forums where, third-party users will publish little plugin or code scripts, to provide conversion for a simple data format. So if it's required by one person, likely it's been done by somebody else, and you may be able to find some additional integration tools available there. That gives you just an overview of the MIB syntax used for Morningstar products. And then when you talk about the specific parameters, we're talking about the OIDs, the object identifiers. And you can see here, this is just an example from our SunSaver MPPT. The screenshot shown on the left there is the window from MSView, again, that PC monitoring software. We basically carried over all of the parameters that are available in MSView via really what is using MODBUS to pull all of those parameters. We replicated those with SNMP. So anything you can see in MSView, you should be able to see with SNMP. And again, each of those parameters, if you look in your OID tables in that Excel spreadsheet, and you go to the SunSaver MPPT tab, you'll see the associated address and scaling for each of those parameters listed there. So that's the way that data is organized. And again, you can see, very specific to, if you're in terms of how you configure your monitoring template, you could have all of the OIDs related to solar data, on the array side in one, section of your template. You could have all of the parameters related to load data on a different section of the template, all of the battery parameters, all the temperature parameters. They can all be segmented so that the data display is a little bit more consistent and straightforward for the user. So with the network management systems, we have tested 5 different platforms in our beta testing internally. Those are listed here. There's so many available commercially, probably over 500 worldwide. There are, varying features and capabilities from one to the next. Again, these are the ones that we we're most comfortable with, or we would recommend based on our experience, and they are the leading brands in the industry from what again we have found. Paceler is a German company. Their networking software is called PRTG. SolarWinds uses the network performance monitor. Nagios is another commonly used one, and again, you have a few additional ones. What we will probably end up doing is a separate webinar with more of a dedicated walkthrough on some of these NMS platforms, so you can see how exactly the solar data integrates with the IT management infrastructure, and how you can utilize these platforms to accommodate Morningstar devices. You'll also find that many of these, again, as I mentioned earlier, there are some shortcuts or some peripheral tools available from some of these network management system providers that can automate some of the importing of a particular device, again, using Morningstar's standardized MIB format with their MIB file for each device. You can a lot of times use various import wizards to upload the MIB files and parse them for the appropriate data that you want to monitor. Some work easier than others. There's a little bit, it's kind of difficult. As much as SNMP is a universal language, there are varying adaptations, and some people adhere to the standard better than others. So you may want to, again, these are the ones that we've tested, we're confident with, we know they work. If you want, additional information about those, you can contact us, and we'd be happy to help you out or connect you with somebody that can give you, some additional resources. All right, and again, just to mention, the main website that you'll want to access is the SNMP FAQ that we have on our homepage. You should see a call out for it. That's going to summarize a lot of the resources, answer a lot of the frequently asked questions, and give you more background information on SNMP. If you guess here, we would say we'll take time for questions. Let me see if I can actually open the questions here. Hang on one second. Why it doesn't work. There we go. Okay, so let's see here. Question here, more on the solar side, but customer asking about, can we use a 100 amp controller for a 5 kilowatt solar system? That Morningstar doesn't currently have in their product portfolio. Hopefully we will soon. But again, you can expect that product to also be implemented with SNMP once it is available through the EMC1 gateway as well. All future devices that are, data enabled should be available with SNMP and corresponding MIB files. Okay, let's see. Okay. The question here from Glenn just wanted to confirm the SNMP set is not going to work for resets or clear counters, etc. Yeah, that will not. In order to do that, you'd have to use our a MODBUS-based interface for the bidirectional communication and allow you to physically change settings using either MSView or another MODBUS-based utility. So the set commands are not available with our SNMP implementation. Do you still need a charge controller reboot after changing the charge parameters remotely? You do, and again, that would be, you can do that through our MSView software using a control coil, or you can do it via the MODBUS commands in the associated MODBUS documents for that particular controller. But anytime you change a setting, you do want to initiate a reboot so that those settings take place in permanent memory. Let's see here. How many different NMSs can work at the same time? That's a good question from Abdul. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know how many instances where people will be using multiple NMSs on the same site, and how our EMC1 would respond to that in terms of managing, a higher level of traffic. I think it's, again, I probably would have to check with our engineering department on that, see if we can get some more testing, see if we can get an answer for you. I appreciate the question. Question from Ron, is the TriStar MPPT-60 enabled? Yes, so the TriStar MPPT-60 does have native Ethernet, but that Ethernet is not supporting SNMP polling. So you would still have to use the EMC1 adapter for polling capability. But yes, that is compatible with the TriStar MPPT-60. It comes with a Y cable. The EMC1 comes with a Y cable. So again, for TriStar and TriStar MPPT family of controllers, you would want to connect that into both the MeterBus port and the DB9 connection. And then the output of the Y cable goes to the EMC1, and then the EMC1 would be connected via Ethernet to your router or switch. Can we see aggregate data for separate solar systems? That's a good question. Yes, you should be able to. Again, a lot of it depends on the network management software. But again, I have seen some capability in terms of management views where you can combine aggregate data from multiple controllers. You can see them at least on the same screen or an overlaid graph. But again, it's going to depend largely on what NMS. Some are, again, more full-featured than others. One in particular that I was really impressed with was SolarWinds. It seems to be the leading NMS. I mean, in terms of the chatter on all the user forums, it often comes up as the highest recommendation. It is, again, a premium service, so they do, charge based on subscription for over a certain number of sites. But I think it's well worth it if you're managing many sites. A large telecom installation. It certainly, pays off because the added resources and tools available to you and the way to customize the management of those devices is, valuable and probably saves you a lot of time. All right, let's see. Okay, is SNMP already pre-installed in my EMC1, or do I need to do a firmware update? You do have to do a firmware update. The SNMP firmware won't be implemented standard from the factory, at least for a while. So for those of you interested in using SNMP, you'll have to do just a firmware update of the EMC1 to version 15 build 0 or later. But all firmware versions going forward should support SNMP. Question here from Lauren. SNMP seems fairly complex for most clients. On what size system should SNMP be used? Well, that's really a good observation, to be honest. I mean, it is for those with, IT networking familiarity. It's, as much as the S in SNMP stands for simple, I can say it's not exactly straightforward. So, you definitely want to have somebody who is knowledgeable about IT systems and can implement sort of the behind-the-scenes network infrastructure for you to get set up and running. SNMP, again, largely valued for the scalability. I would say it certainly pays off when you are in the hundreds of sites. Hundreds to thousands definitely makes more sense. As a rule of thumb, I don't know that it, necessarily is a live and die by, but 50 sites. If you have at least 50 sites, it's probably a good idea because again, then you may pay for a network management software license, and again, that investment can pay off based on all the additional visibility and status views you can see. Gives you a lot more insight into your system operation overall. Again, if you're already using one of those software packages, it's just a simple integration to use to get Morningstar in the network. So really, again, I understand what you're saying. I think it is really more for IT professionals, not necessarily a user-friendly protocol for residential homeowners, I would say. All right, I think what I'll do is I will follow up via email on a lot of the other questions I wasn't able to get to. Apologize for running a little bit over, but I will follow up via email for those that have asked questions and try to get back to you. If you didn't get the opportunity to ask a question, feel free to just go to the website and fill out the Contact Us form on the homepage, and then we'll be sure to get back to you. Appreciate everyone for joining. Hope everyone stays safe, and thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.